The struggle is real. Growing food and gardens can be easy, can be fun, can be enjoyable, it can also be a pain in the butt. And there's a lot of times where you're going to run into more headaches and hassles, and it makes you think, is it really worth it? Short answer, yes it is. Zero Urban Sentinel, and let's get into it. So, I've been gardening off and on, but regularly about 5-6 years. I've had some successes and I've had some failures, and I've tried different things, and that's really what it comes down to. Most of what I've been doing has always been in my yard. I've done traditional in-ground planting. I've done some raised beds, some box beds. I've done different combinations of buckets and pots and things like that. I've had some success and some failure. If any of you have watched some of my earlier gardening videos, you know that I've been in a constant battle against woodchucks on my property, that they've really been doing a number. So I've decided to relocate my garden, and I'm going to be working on clearing the area, building up fencing and things like that for the new garden that I'm going to be getting started. One of the first things that I'm going to end up having to do is get rid of my compost bin. Now, this is just simply a set of pallets put together, leaves, soil, food waste, that sort of thing. And it has worked out well, but it's getting old, it's getting a little rickety, and I'm going to be redoing everything. So I'm going to be swapping effectively this out for a large black bucket type of situation, probably a 32-gallon drum. It's going to compact it, it's going to make it a little bit smaller, a little bit easier for me to handle, and it'll also be mobile for my ideas in terms of my new garden setup. The biggest task I have is, of course, the greenhouse. It's roughly a 6x8 by 5 and 6 foot greenhouse, aluminum framing, plastic panels, nothing much in particular. I think I paid maybe a little under $200 for this from, I think it was Ocean State Job Lot, you know, one of those out of the box deals. And it does quite well. Right now it's about 80 degrees inside, and it's 32 degrees out here. Now, my yard as a whole gets more sunlight in the front, which is the reason why I had the garden originally in the front yard than it does in the backyard, and I have less open space back there. But through recent weather events and my neighbors clearing out a couple of their trees, part of my house and the side of the yard now has ample sunlight to get a good solid 3 to 5 hours worth of sunlight in the wintertime, and probably a good 6 hours worth easily or more during the summertime. So now I'll be relocating the greenhouse from up there in the front to over here on the side. Most of my garden area is going to be along this area right next to the house. It's probably going to be about 12 by 24 overall, and I end up fencing it in. And I'll probably end up putting the greenhouse in this area right along here from my backyard coming up front, and then having the rest of this area all along this side coming up towards the front of the house will be fenced in as well. Now, I've done planting in cinder blocks, which did work out well for certain things. Other things, it just wasn't happening. It was less about the cinder blocks, more about the soil content and the quality of the soil because of the way that the water would drain through. So I had some issues with that, and it was an experiment, and I still say it was kind of successful for what it was. I've also done planting in large pots, smaller pots, and 5-gallon food grade buckets also. And again, I've had success and failures in both areas with these things. But from all of that, I've decided that the optimum thing for me, given my soil conditions in the area as a whole, is once I have the garden area fenced off, I'm going to be setting up and establishing raised beds. I'm thinking about getting the aluminum cast raised beds, filling those with effectively yard debris, you know, branches, leaves, twigs, all that sort of stuff, packing that in, filling up at least the lower half of it, and then adding in the soil, adding in some of the compost, and letting that sit through the rest of the winter. So this way, come spring, it's more amended and more ready for planting. And then, of course, selecting the proper vegetables to put in, timing out when the last frost is going to be, and getting everything established that way. So I'm sticking with some of the traditional plants, the vegetables that most gardeners grow. I'm going to have squash, I'm going to have pole beans and bush beans. I'm going to be doing, you know, some tomatoes, some peppers, things like that. But I'm also going to be looking at growing potatoes and putting in probably more greens, more kale, more lettuce, mustard greens, collard greens, that sort of thing, making it a little bit more sustainable. With that, I'm looking at really streamlining my garden down, so the planter beds that I buy and the buckets and the pots that I'm going to be using, I'm going to limit the volume that I put in there. So I'm really going to narrow down to key vegetables that tend to work best within my growing environment, but also tend to have a lower maintenance level. So this way, one, is easier to keep up with all of them, because that can be a problem that you run into sometimes if you don't really meticulously plan certain things out. You start missing waterings, overwatering, you know, checking the sun to shade content, all that sort of thing. You can end up stunting the growth and development of certain plants or killing them outright. And then you turn around, you've got pests to deal with and everything else, and that just adds to the headache. But overall, I still stand by that if you have an opportunity and you have the space available, gardening is something that is definitely beneficial as an overall hobby. It produces something at the other end of it, so it's something tangible. It's a skill set, something that you can learn to do and you get better with. And again, like I said before, you make mistakes, you learn from those. You go online, you watch YouTube channels, you see little things that people are doing, and you go, maybe I'll try that out. You find out more about what you need to do to make things a little bit easier for you. Sometimes you got to think outside the box, and other times it's, you know, plain and simple, you know, do what works for everyone else, because that's what works for everyone else. So probably over the next 4 or 5 videos for my gardening and food storage, that's what you're going to start seeing. You're going to start seeing part of the either demolition, deconstruction, and then the building of the new garden, planting, and going through the areas that I'm going to be setting things up. And hopefully along the way, I'll be able to provide a little bit more insight into the little tiny details of what I'm doing and how I hope that, you know, fingers crossed, it works out for me. So hopefully when all that's said and done, come middle of spring, end of May, middle of June, I'll start to see some results from what I'm doing, and hopefully the benefit will definitely outweigh the headache and heartache that will be surely down the road as this whole process goes through. Anyway, that's it for now. Catch you guys in the next one.